I'm here with Dr. Cobb,
Amen.
one of the world's leading experts in harnessing the power of the neurology of movement to create extraordinary change in the human body. Dr. Cobb's innate passion for human physiology and psychology began when he was first introduced to the martial arts as a 6-year-old boy. His passion for martial arts and all things athletic led him to dig deeply into the science of movement over the last 20 years and developed a global and holistic approach to health and performance based on the brain. Thank you very much for your time today. It is really an honor.
Thank you, sir. I'm glad to be here.
I got that from Amazon. So.
I was like, where did you get that bio?
But I liked it. It was very fitting.
Yeah. There's some accuracy in there. I've been interested in this stuff for a very long time. So, yeah.
Could you tell me about your martial arts background? What?
Yeah.
Never really got into it. You know,
Yeah.
You always mention it, and you always recommend everybody to do martial arts. So I wanted to hear a little bit about your background.
Sure. So yeah, I don't actually remember. I'm about to turn 50, so it was either 5 years old or 6 years old. I don't remember. And I actually started off, my first, I think, 5 or 6 years of training were in a Japanese jiu-jitsu style that had come through Hawaii. So started off, it's more traditional. There was some emphasis on groundwork, but it was kind of a blend of striking and groundwork. Fell in love with it immediately. That was like the Bruce Lee era. And so I wanted to be Bruce Lee. And so I started training, and I really haven't stopped. I've been training 45 years now. So I started off in, like I said, that system. And then I kind of went through what I call the typical American progression. So Jiu-Jitsu, Shotokan. After Shotokan, I moved into Taekwondo for a brief period, some Hapkido. At that time, I also had, my family is a military family. So my uncles that had come back from Vietnam, they got me into, more combative oriented training. And then I started boxing and some wrestling. So kind of did a big blend of things. I felt like I was super lucky in my 20s. I met some really high-level practitioners of Filipino martial arts and Indonesian. So I then spent another 6 or 7 years really digging into Silat, which I found really interesting. And then from there, I just kind of have trained with whoever I could find. On the combatives world, I spent a lot of time training with Tony Blauer, a guy named Lee Morrison from Urban Combatives, Kelly McCann. So because of my background and people I was working with, I also got into the close quarter combative side. So did a lot of shooting and other stuff like that. So it's been a big blend over the years. I have a lot of good friends that are heavily into BJJ. So they've taught me a lot over time. And of the last few years, I've spent a little bit of time with some Systema practitioners, which has been interesting. I like a lot of their emphasis on movement and fluidity. So yeah, it's, kind of, I think over 40 years or so of this, you get introduced to a lot of things depending on how much you move around, and I've kind of moved around a lot. So.
Have you ever heard of the Dog Brothers?
Oh yeah.
through harder contact, higher consciousness, something like that.
Correct.
Yeah, one of the founders used to train with me in Santa Fe, New Mexico. His name.
Oh wow. Very cool.
And I never did any of that. I never did any stick fighting, but I was always kind of, he got me into it basically.
Yeah.
With his fights, and it really changed my perspective. And really, I think it was one of the. I went to the park to watch, and he's like, "Hey, jump in," and yeah, he's like, I was like, "What do I do?" He's like, "Just swing really, really hard." Thanking that.
Yeah.
And so I hit him on the top of the head.
Uh-huh.
And the guy dropped, and he had a lot of experience, but just kind of, I had a lot of experience of competing and fighting and stuff.
Right.
But he dropped, and then afterwards, though, I had all these like hematomas all over my body. And it was something that I never forgot. It was like, wow, just my ability, I didn't feel it, right?
Mm-hmm.
In that scenario, but just kind of started to shift, like get my thinking towards like the brain and the like, neural and things like that. I think
Right.
that big.
Yeah, it's one of the, I think, on the sports performance side, it's one of the things that we're really interested in is what parts of the brain light up, what parts of the brain shut down when you're under high stress. On our side, we do so much sports performance, but also rehab. And I used to work a lot with military and do a lot of rehab with veterans, and then also training. And so one of the things that I used to always ask them is, hey, I got a bunch of guys that have come back that have been shot or blown up, and you always ask them those questions. Did you know? Did you notice? And probably 80% of the time are like, I had no idea. So whenever you're under that high stress, particularly something that's non-rehearsed, non-technical, and very survival-based, your brain shuts down a lot of those signals, and you figure that out much later.
Yeah, you always recommend in your certifications gymnastics or martial arts.
Yep.
Could you go a little bit more into that? Why that is?
Yeah. So I'm asked all the time because we get most of the people that we train are health and fitness pros, coaches, whatever. And they always ask me about their kids. Like, hey, if I was going to give my kid a great athletic base, where would I start them? And so the two things I usually recommend are martial arts, gymnastics. And if they're not into either one of those things, I say, hey, try to get them into some kind of dance. Because really what we're trying to do in the beginning stages of developing movement competency is we want good bilateral development. And most sports, when you look at them, they tend to be heavily unilateral, right? If I'm a baseball player, I'm going to throw right-handed, hit right-handed most of the time. So in terms of developing overall movement qualities, and particularly that are full body, I think martial arts, particularly when it's well taught, is one of the best foundations for being good at anything else that you want to do. I kind of feel the same way about gymnastics if it's done appropriately. You can get a lot of kids that wind up getting pretty hurt early on if they get into really high intensity gymnastics. But it teaches you great body control, works on what we call the visual system, vestibular systems. I think for me on the, like I said, just general foundational side for developing athleticism, I really don't know of a better tool than martial arts. And obviously, like everything else, it comes down to the quality of the instructor.
Right, of course.
Right. And they have to really be focused on, developing those basic athletic qualities. You want to build your speed, your endurance, your strength, your flexibility, your mobility, your motor control. And then on top of that, you look at the sport itself or the activity itself, and then ask yourself, what other qualities does it demand? So for instance, if I've got a boxer, right, and take a kid, maybe getting hit in the head a bunch as a 8-9-year-old isn't the best idea. But the hand-eye coordination, the ability to see incoming targets, move off of them, is great. And then I go, okay, so you're getting some visual development, you're getting a lot of balance development. What you might not see in that 8-9-year-old is other strength qualities or other training qualities. So you think about something like a grappling art where there's a lot of tactile development, also a lot of isometric strength. So I love martial arts, particularly in the early stages of training, because it gives you the ability to blend so many different attributes that will help later on.
We start the kids here. We have a 2 to 4-year-old class.
Nice.
And sometimes we get some people. Oh, what does that have to do? How are they going to learn how to fight? Right? At 2 years old.
Right.
It's not about that. It's about so much more, right?
Right now, one of the things that we're talking about all over the world is really a loss of movement quality, right? We're seeing so many kids that by the time they're 13, 14, they look very different, right, than kids 30, 40 years ago, simply because technology has allowed us to do a lot less movement. And so, yeah, I'm always trying to emphasize in the beginning, if you want to be great at fighting, that's cool, right? That's my background. That's what I'm interested in. But just using it as a physical preparation platform for anything else you want to be great at, I think it's huge. One of the things I think a lot of parents don't know is if you work with high-level athletes, which we do in a ton of different sports, if you look at the world right now, a lot of people think they need this early specialization, right? You're gonna be a great soccer player, you need to start at 6, and the fact is that most really high-level elite athletes were multi-sport athletes. They didn't just do one thing. And that's all about the brain development that comes from doing, different things, learning different tactics, learning to use your bodies in different ways. So yeah, even as young as 2-3 years old, you're starting to set a great foundation. So that's cool to hear.
Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and gymnastics is probably pretty good for that, laying that foundation, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Like when I've traveled around the world following Z Health,
Yeah.
up and all over the country, and people always ask me, how did in Germany and Copenhagen, they ask me like how did Z Health, where did that come from, or how did they get going? And when I looked on the Amazon, it said like creator and co-founder.
Mm-hmm.
So how did it evolve? How does Z Health evolve?
Ooh, really good question. It's like any other business, right? You start with one idea in mind, and then you typically wind up with a different one. So long story short, when I first went to school, I studied biology, planning to go to med school, had the grades, etc. But when I started doing some internships with allopathic physicians, I realized that it wasn't really for me. It was kind of, at that time, kind of in the box thinking, and that I was more interested in movement. I was more interested in what I call a holistic approach. So I decided to go to chiropractic college instead. So went through chiropractic college, and I tell people I actually didn't really go because I was interested in patient care. I was more interested in athletes and becoming a better athlete myself. And I learned a tremendous amount, a lot to that foundational education. But when I got out in the practice and I started working with people, I quickly ran into a lot of roadblocks where I saw improvements in some, and I didn't see a lot of the tools that I'd been taught as they were applied. I didn't see them working very well, and that drove me crazy because I'm a bit of a perfectionist, and I always felt like, hey, I want to help 100% of the people that walk through here. So at that point,
that got me to go all in on Z Health.
Yeah. It's because for me, I feel like that's our ethical responsibility. Someone comes to you, you need to figure out a way to help them. So that led me into a lot of less, I guess, traditional thinking at that point, trying to figure out, okay, how do we improve movement at a more foundational level? And that took me all the way back to neurology. So when I was in school, we did take neuroanatomy classes, we took neurophysiology classes. And they were cool, they were interesting, but really as a student, you spent a lot of time learning names and, drawing stuff on paper. And what was missing for me personally was the ability to connect that neurology to someone standing in front of me. So the Z Health curriculum really started to evolve out of a lot of personal study, exposure to a huge number of super smart people around the world, but then trying to figure out how to translate that information into something practical. So in around 2003, 2004, I launched the company as an education company because I thought, all right, I spent about 8 or 9 years personally working on this stuff for myself, right? I had a lot of chronic pain from sports injuries and concussions and other stuff that happens whenever you're a fighter that was not being remedied with some of the, both traditional and non-traditional approaches. So I spent a lot of time playing with different ideas. When I got into neurology, it taught me so much about how movement is controlled. And I recognized at that time that really, even as a neuromusculoskeletal guy, supposedly coming out of school, I didn't have a very good or a very full view of how movement was created. So that led me into thinking about the visual system, or what's called vestibular system, inner ear, how we control balance, how we interact with the world. And then slowly over time was kind of able to build that into a training curriculum. So I tell people, the main thing I would say about our courses is these are the classes I wish I'd been taught, right? The coursework that we do doesn't negate other information. It doesn't, you still have to learn your anatomy. You need to know how to teach exercise. You need to know how to watch people. Like that's one of the most critical skills for a movement professional. But once you can take that foundational info and then layer on top of that, you know, what we've learned in the last 15, 20 years about motor control, how the systems interact, it can make you really, really fast at identifying issues and giving people kind of unique, simple ways to solve them. So interestingly enough, I guess the reason that all this blew up all over the world is that people were feeling the same frustrations, right? You spend, you know, 20 years or so getting all the way through school and your professional degree, and then you start working with real people and you're like, I don't know what to do. So I think the frustration resonated. And then thankfully, a lot of the interventions that we teach seem to have become very effective for people. So I didn't have any great master plan, marketing genius, because I'm not that guy. I just like to teach. So the company's grown, exponentially just by word of mouth primarily.
Word of mouth.
Yeah.
What Z Health? What is Z Health? What is the Z, or what is right? That's another big question people always ask.
Yeah, I get asked this all the time. So if we track this all the way back, Z Health actually is a tribute name. Some of the doctors I worked with originally in the mid-90s had been to Czechoslovakia and studied. It's called the Prague School of Medicine. It's super well known in the rehab world because there are 3 very famous neurologists who specialize in musculoskeletal problems. And basically they laid the foundation for almost everything everyone does now. So Vladimir Janda, Carl Lewitt was another one, and then Pavel Kolar, I believe, was the third. And like I said, these guys have kind of formed the foundation for most of what you see in PT, a lot of what you see in chiropractic rehab, a lot of what you see even in, kind of more fringe systems, because they were some of the first doctors who really blended the idea of neurology into, hey, someone's got knee pain. What does that mean about their spinal cord? What does that mean about their brain? What does that mean about their eyes? Can we connect those dots? They were super brilliant, and they didn't have, at that time, access to the technology that we have now. So super intuitive. They're very thoughtful. So I was trained by 2 doctors that I worked with in my internships, had been to Czechoslovakia. They got me very interested in kind of, Eastern European, Russian methodology. And then obviously, Scott Sonnen. So years ago, Scott, before TACFIT, his very early movement system was called Zdravia, which is also the Russian name for, or, it's the toast for health. So the combination of those 2 influences, when I was naming the system, named it Z Health. So the Z is a tribute to Zdravia. So it's this kind of a tribute name. That's how it got started. And then over time, people are like, you really should change the name, because no, that doesn't tell anybody what this means. But we figured, hey, it's easy to remember, and it's just stuck ever since.
I like it.
Yeah.
Wanted to kind of change gears a little bit. Like one of the other things that really kind of sucked me in was talking about the stress bucket, especially in the times that we're in right now, right? With the stress bucket and the COVID and everything else.
Yeah. So you want a little overview idea?
Yeah. What the stress bucket is.
Yeah. So again, one of the interesting things I think for me in all the neurology is, obviously as a physician, we see people for pain, right? 98% of the time people are coming in not because they want to be a better athlete, but because they're like, hey, my shoulder hurts, my back, my knee, I have a headache. So in connection with improvements in increased understanding of neurology of movement, we've also seen a huge upswing in our understanding of pain. And so when you look at modern pain neuroscience, one of the things that's become super clear is that if I have elbow pain, that pain that I'm feeling is actually created by my brain. Now, people first hear that, they go, wait a minute. You mean it's not real? That's not what I'm saying at all, right? We say all pain is real, right? If your brain's making it, it's actually something you're experiencing. But what's really come out of all this research is that your brain is constantly being bombarded with signals from the periphery, right? So as you're standing there, sitting there, it's getting all these signals from all the nerves in your skin, your tissue, whatever. And it's the sum of those signals. When they get to the brain, your brain has to make a decision about it, right? And the first decision it always makes is this dangerous? Is it not dangerous? And usually if your brain sums all these signals together and says, I don't like what's happening, it will try to create some kind of behavior change. And the behavior change, the signal used most often is pain. Now, there are other signals that our brain uses to protect us, like I'm uncomfortable, I'm anxious, I'm a little depressed. There's a lot of different things that we see right now in the literature that are the end result of your brain's innate desire to keep you safe. So when you talk about this to people in the real world, they go, okay, that kind of makes sense, but I still like to use a visual, and I call it the stress bucket or the threat bucket. So I always draw this out on a piece of paper. I draw a bucket, and I put a spout about 2/3 of the way up out of the bucket. And I basically say, you know what, you wake up in the morning and you're going to start layering in things that are threatening, right? And as human beings, we're pretty resilient. We're tough creatures. But at some point, if we collect enough threats throughout the day or throughout the month, when that threat reaches a high enough level, it will start to create some kind of protective output. And you know, when I use that analogy for people, they go, okay, that kind of makes sense, right? Because you know that if you're sleeping well, you're eating well, you're exercising, you have a bad day at work and you're still fine. Like, yeah, I'm okay. Yeah, it was stressful, but you go home, you go to sleep, you wake up feeling okay. However, if you're eating like crap, you're not exercising, and you have a bad day, those stressors go up faster. And now that's the day that you come home, you're like, man, my back's killing me, or I'm starting to get a headache. So as a professional, then what we do is we say, what are the different things that actually feed into that stress bucket? And you can make lists now, right? As I've mentioned, we know that poor sleep is a huge stressor for people. General uncertainty, right? Anxiety, any kind of psychological stress. Obviously, that's what everyone's facing right now. But on top of that, your nutrition, your exercise program. Do you like it or do you hate it, right? That actually really matters. Some people go, you know, I need to exercise. And I go, well, if you hate exercising so much that it's a huge stressor, it may not be benefiting you as much as you want. So let's find something you enjoy. And then on top of that, how your eyes work. Right now, I was actually just writing an email about this because if you look at some of the stats that are coming out because of the coronavirus, screen usage is skyrocketing. Like people are 70, 80, 100% more screen time per week than maybe they were getting previously. If you have vision problems, all of a sudden your stress levels are going up and up. On top of that, inner ear issues, even ones that you're unaware of. I'm not saying that, yeah, I have vertigo, but small inner ear issues, that makes your brain feel less safe. So what we kind of teach is that as a professional, you have to have a checklist, right? And you work through these individually with people. And as you lower any threat or any stress, you lower the overall level in the bucket and things get better. And this really was driven not through science in the beginning. It was just anecdotal working with patients, because sometimes patients would come in, they would have pain, and you would do something and it didn't help. And then you made some kind of habit change with them or just asked them to do something somewhat different. And all of a sudden their pain would go away. And you couldn't directly tie it to something that changed in their muscles, tendons, or joints. So, you know, for us, it's a super powerful teaching point. It's a great way to think. And I guess for me, being a science nerd, the cool thing is we now have 20 plus years of really good pain science to support all this, which is very important, because when someone comes to you and they go, hey, I have back pain, you go, all right, let me test your eyes. In the beginning, they think that's weird. So you have to have some way to explain to them why you're doing these things.
I went to, I think it was to Germany. I think it was in Bonn last year. I went to, I think it was the Speak, and the colors, right?
Yeah.
So talking about being on the screen.
Yep.
And they showed us a trick on, you know, the blue light receptors, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that it gets overused. And so obviously, if we're already on our phones so much and on electronics so much, but now it's going to increase even more. So could you explain that a little bit? What happened when you had the blue light, and then you had actually there was a setting on our iPhones that you could change it to green or red or whatever that worked better, and it was different for everybody. Everybody had different responses in the room.
Correct. Yeah. So I guess the easiest way to start discussing something like this is to tell people how you feel. And again, on a very mechanical level, how you feel, whether you're in pain or you feel great, this is all just a collection, a summation of how your neurons are working, right? Whether neurons are on, whether they're off. Neurons are the basic nerves of the brain. And I tell people they really do three things. They either stay the same, they turn on, they turn off. That's it. And how they work together then creates all these things that we experience. So the science around color has been explored for hundreds of years because, you know, again, humans are pretty intuitive. A lot of people, you ask them, hey, where do you feel best? And they'll go, oh, I feel the best when I am X. You know, usually we'll say something like, I feel best when I'm out for a walk in the woods. I love the trees, blah, blah, blah. Other people will say, I feel the best when I'm by the ocean. And so we, again, a lot of people, when you feel the worst, gray, cloudy days, right? They just kill me. So we've known kind of intuitively as mammals that color makes a difference, but the actual hard research on what happens in the brain has really just occurred probably in the last, I would say 8 or 9 years. And a lot of this is still very, we're very early on. And this is one of the things I always try to get people to understand. No one knows everything about neurology, right? This is still a baby field. We're still learning. But on the whole, what we can say right now that we understand about color is that when we look at overall brain activation, if I take a group of people and I measure brain activity and then I expose them to blue light, and then I compare that blue light exposure to, let's say, red light exposure and green light exposure, we can track overall brain activity. So the thing that we see with blue light is that blue is the most stimulating of all the colors that we've yet tested. So in other words, it makes more brain activity occur than any other color. This is on the neuro side, this is one of our concerns with a lot of screen time before you try to go to sleep, because you're getting all this light exposure, particularly blue light exposure, that may increase brain activity and arousal brain activity, like waking you up, which just makes it harder for your sleep mechanisms to kick in. So we tell people that in general, you know, we can say blue light's really stimulating. Red light is also stimulating, but less so than blue. And then if we look at green, green's probably the most calming, right? We see very little, or we see kind of neutral brain activity and sometimes a relaxation of brain activity. There's some researchers at Oxford about 2 years ago that published on using green light as a potential, you know, helpful treatment for people that have migraines. You expose people that are getting migraine to green colors, and a lot of times their pain levels will go down. So the reason that we have people test colors, though, is that we don't know what your brain has suffered, right? If you work with fighters, particularly guys that have been knocked out a bunch or, you know, even maybe choked out a lot in their life, they may have different brain activation patterns than someone else. And because everything in the brain is about, like I said, the excitation and inhibition, some people may actually like blue light, right? Meaning their brain is kind of asleep all the time. It's not as active as it should be. So we expose them to blue and they're like, oh my gosh, I feel so much better. Conversely, because brains are weird, sometimes a part will, you know, you get injured and a part will be inhibited, then the other side of the brain or other parts of the brain become more active. So then you get in that playing with, you know, do you need green on the right side, blue on the left side? That gets more complicated. That's stuff that you have to test. But on the whole, it's a very interesting and pretty powerful tool. So I think it's really helpful for people right now to understand that if you're getting a lot of light exposure, you need to consider maybe doing some testing. So like on your iPhone, you can go into the accessibility settings. And under the accessibility settings, you can test, you can change the color of your screen to red or green or blue or purple. And what we normally have people do is just read or do a visual test and go, oh, wow, with it more green, I can actually see more clearly, or I feel more relaxed. So, you know, there's a lot of very practical things that you can do. And I find them really, you know, I tell people we're basically a big collection of our habits, right? How we move, how we feel. A lot of it's habitual. So if you know that you're going to be on a screen, rather than trying to kill yourself and go, no, I'm not going to watch TV for the next 3 hours before I go to bed, because right now most people aren't going to do that. But if you can moderate the colors somehow, you may find that you sleep better and you feel better.
for sure. I've shown that trick to my wife and everybody around, friends, and so they have a slightly like yellow green kind of a screen walking around with it. They're like, what's wrong? And somebody goes to take a picture of my phone, and all of a sudden they're like,
what's wrong?
what's going on with the screen?
Yeah, it's cool though. It really, I have been, technology has actually made a lot of this stuff so much easier.
Yeah.
Because years ago, before you could do a lot of stuff with a phone, I would use, for kids that were having trouble reading, we would take overlays, like plastic overlays, and put it over a book when people still know what a book was. Lay it over the pages, and a lot of times you can actually hear the change in how the child was reading, and even adults. So it's fascinating stuff.
One of the selling points when I tell my friends about the color, I have them put the screen to red. Usually red gets them to read a little bit faster, a little bit better.
Yeah.
Like, oh, well, okay, yeah, that's it. And
Yeah.
it sells them on the idea, right, that actually it's actually a real thing.
Totally.
And they start to do it. Yeah.
Very cool.
So, I've become so passionate about the brain, especially with some of my diagnoses and things like that happened to me, And I have 3 kids, and when my son has some issues like learning or remembering things, and we'll talk about the visual and the vestibular and the integration, really, right, of all these systems and senses.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think it would help kids that grow up into adults, right? You think it would help them to be assessed when they first go into school?
Oh yeah, this is one of my. I don't want to call it a pipe dream, because I actually hope
Would it change the world?
it would change a kid's world. That's what I can definitively say. My hope over time is that this type of thinking will make its way more out into the mainstream. In the world of science, one of the things that we talk about is what's called the research effect. And unfortunately, well, years ago, before we had the internet, yes, I'm that old, we would talk about a 15 to 20 year filter effect, which meant that if a guy was doing some cool research in a lab at UCLA, it would probably take 20 years for his findings to actually make its way out into the general population of practitioners that should know that information and use that information. I was pretty excited as the growth of the internet began. I thought, hey, we're going to really see a shortening of that filter effect, and unfortunately it hasn't happened. We still, I think, see 10, 15-year delays in really cool, interesting information that's very practical and useful. It takes a very long time because it actually has to go back through a lot of the educational curricula. And so my hope, like I said, in my lifetime, is to see screening programs built somehow, whether it's in the school system, whether it's in training environments, so that children are evaluated early on for basics, right? We all know, right now, the kids in school, let's say they're 5 or 6 years old and they're having trouble reading. Most teachers and, the school occupational therapists, they know enough to say, hey, let's actually get these kids' eyes, get his eyes evaluated. Maybe they just can't see. We have to maybe move them up in the classroom so they can see the board, et cetera. But I don't think the screening programs are currently sufficient. I don't think they're in depth enough, because in general, when people think about the visual system, they mainly look at, is it clear or not, right? Can you read at this distance? Can you read at this distance? And there's so much more. On the sports vision side of the world, we talk about 20 plus different attributes. So what we do right now is we try to get people to understand, if your child is not doing something that you think would be fairly normal, right? Let's say you've got a 6-year-old, 7-year-old, and they're already starting to shy away from any sport or activity that requires them to catch a ball or to interact with something moving at them quickly. That may be because their visual system or their inner ear is not competent. And you can identify that stuff and you can remedy it. In terms of changing lives, yeah, this is huge. Some of my favorite stories usually come from our trainers who are parents themselves or who work specifically with children. And you have a kid has delayed reading, or either it's reading competency or reading comprehension that's a problem for them. And you start doing a little bit of just simple neuro stuff, and all of a sudden they jump 2 or 3 grades in their abilities. For the kids themselves, that change in confidence is absolutely enormous. So will it change the world? I don't know, but will it change someone's world? Yeah, for sure.
Sure, for sure. Well, I'm really, we're having the hopefully the essentials in July, right?
Yep.
Essentials here.
Fingers crossed, we'll see, yeah.
I'm hoping for that. That way I can get a lot of my kids' coaches and my coaches on board with Z Help. We sent a couple of them in San Diego in January when stuff was still normal, but hoping for the July date still, you guys can start to educate themselves and open up their minds, to this way,
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be a certain way, right? You don't have to go to the doctor and listen to what they say, because a lot of the times, right, like they're not up to date to actually really what, like you're saying, it's such a delay, right, of information trickling down.
It's hard, I get asked a lot about this, and I always try to be very clear with people. The medical profession, these people are fantastic at what they do. They really are. I have lots of friends that are doctors. I think they're super dedicated. The issue that we run into really is, what's their job, right? I tell people a doctor's job is to identify pathology that can either make you sick, keep you sick, or kill you, and deal with that. They don't have the time and often the training to look at these more subtle differences. So you really, particularly for adults or children who have a significant issue, you often need a team of people with different expertise. But the big problem is the early identification, right? If you have someone that has a pretty big overview of how these systems work, and you can watch a kid or watch an adult and go, that's weird, and you can work on that, you can also make appropriate referrals. So I love, if you come to our, the people that come to our courses always comment on the fact that in any given course that we teach, you'll have personal trainers, you'll have athletic coaches, you'll have physical therapists, chiropractors, occasional MDs, nurses, occupational therapists, all in the same room. And that's something that we have tried to emphasize really since the beginning, because most of us, martial arts,
guys.
because most of what you see in the continuing ed world is everyone's of the same background. So I love the idea that people start to go, oh, these guys know a lot about this. This guy knows a lot about this, because I think being able to offer, being able to understand everyone's field makes you so much better at what you do, and also better able to help whoever's in front of you.
Yeah, one of the slides that you have early on in all your courses, really, why do we have a brain?
Yeah.
Why do we have a brain? And there's that C-squared story, and there's like a TED talk on it, right? And just a lot of things like that. So
yeah,
why do we have a brain?
Yeah, there's Daniel Wolpert is the guy that did the TED talk on this several years ago. It's a fantastic talk, and basically his whole point was, we have a brain so that we can move. That's really the end of the story. He always uses the example of the sea squirt. People who don't know what that is, little sea creature, when it's born, it has a brain, uses that brain to move around on the seafloor, find a rock. And once it finds a spot where nutrients are coming to it, and it doesn't really need to do much other than just sit there, it eats its own brain. That's literally what this thing does. It's part of its evolution. So whenever you look at, us as mammals, we have to have the ability to move in order to survive, to enact our will in the world. And the vast majority of both what I call conscious and unconscious, or what we would call cortical and subcortical processing in the brain, is to help us be good movers, right? To be efficient movers, so that, humans are kind of unique. We, as mammals, we can be pretty fast, pretty strong, also have massive endurance. So we're in this kind of weird spot. The biggest thing, though, is that we can think, and we can use that thinking to plan our movements, to manipulate things. So I'm what I call a movement chauvinist, right? Meaning I think that the more we can get people to move, the better, particularly when we're teaching them to move and supporting their movement in the right way. So yeah, I love the talk and I love the concept because I think, obviously, if you look at morbidity and mortality statistics around the world, 8 of the 10 killers, or really 10 of the 10 biggest killers of humans, they call them lifestyle diseases. And I just call them lack of movement diseases. Because most of it relates to the fact that we become sedentary. That sedentary behavior echoes into a lot of things. It changes our metabolism, but really lack of movement changes brain function.
Mm-hmm.
So I think a lot of the things that we see happening to people are related to movement deficits and just not only too little movement, but too little good movement.
Right. Quality movement, right?
Yeah.
Quality movement is what it's all about.
Yeah. It's always been my point of focus because to try and make this sensible to people, I say, hey, who do we hold up? Like, who are our heroes? Probably 70–80% of the world, if you ask them who are the current cultural heroes, they'll say athletes. And I'm like, right. We love to watch athletes because they move well. And I think just there's something very innate in us that we like to watch people who are good at something. And what's currently still most attractive for most of the world are people who have high level movement skills. So the more we can drive people toward that themselves, I think it makes them better functioning.
You know, we mentioned earlier that, like you want to be able to help every single person that comes to see you. And that's something that really resonated with me. And so I was actually on one of the early videos that I actually found you on Instagram, you know, and then all the things started to resonate with me. And I was like, oh, it's because I'm all in, I'm 100% into tac fit and doing these things. And then I see this little Instagram post and he's talking about the brain and neuroscience and it kind of pulled me in. But what really got me was you saying, I want to be able to help every single person that comes in here.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to do that. You know, I want to be able to help every single person that comes in. You know, I used to have students, my lower back is hurt, my knee is hurt, you know, and I was like, oh, sorry, you know, and, you know, they go to the doctor and they go, hey, I have to get shoulder surgery. And
right.
You know, now I'm gaining knowledge. I'm like, let me see, and I can, you know, have them stretch out. And, oh, it looks like your lats are tight. And I have them stretch your lats. And they trust me, so they do it, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's given me like, you know, it's given me a lot of confidence, right? And to help people, right? Just kind of doing these things. And where does this passion come from you to help people and to do this work? You know, where does this passion come from?
Interesting. I don't know that anyone's asked me that question.
Because you know, I've talked to, you know, I've traveled to different parts of the world, you know, to do some of your courses.
Yeah.
And, you know, I have some time after to, you know, chit chat with different people from around the world. And I mean, you're a machine, you know, you're a machine. When does this guy sleep? You know, you're doing research it seems like all day long. You know, you make these nice slides for us to study. You try to, and you're like, yeah, this slide took about 5 years, you know, 3 years, you know, to, you know, one little slide, and you're like, you know, for us to have it be digestible, to kind of understand the concepts and everything else, you know.
Yeah. Well, that's a really interesting question. I guess at a very basic level, I've told people for years, I'm super attracted to extraordinary performers, right? Just the extraordinary for me has always been, I think, the biggest driver. As an athlete, as a business person, whatever, I don't like mediocre anything. And as you know, when I first got out in practice, and I still remember like my my very first patient when I was an intern doctor, right? So I think my third year of school, got my suit and tie on, got my white coat on because we had, you know, our dress code. And I literally, my very first patient, I don't know if you ever heard this at one of the courses, my very first patient I ever had, I'm sitting back in the intern lounge. I hear my name. I'm like, it's on, right? And I'm thinking, okay, 3 years, been studying anatomy, or 4 years doing anatomy and all my practice. And I'm hoping it's going to be a back pain or shoulder pain case or whatever. So they call me up. I go and get the paperwork, take it back to the lounge. flip it open, start looking through the history, and I literally went blank because I had no idea what to do. Because the guy that I was seeing, you know, when you go to the doctor and they got the bodies on the history form, circle this or whatever. We had a form that had a picture of a body, and it basically said, if you have numbness, put an N. If you feel burning pain, put a B, right? Circle the area that hurts. And this guy had literally split his body in half and on the paper, and on one entire side of his body, he just wrote small N's, right, for numb. So literally, he was like cut in half, completely numb on one side of the body. And even though I'd done neuro and I'd done all this stuff, I went blank. I had no idea what to do. So I found my overseeing doctor. I showed him the history. He looked at me and he goes, "Good luck." Turned around and walked off. And I went, "That's not helpful at all." So, you know, that was literally my very first patient experience. As it turned out, the guy had a stroke, and we were able to refer him out and all this kind of stuff. But I hated that feeling more than anything. I hate not feeling competent to at least know what's going on. So most of what I do is, I guess, first of all, for myself, because I want to be thoroughly educated. And then secondarily to that, I feel like our job as teachers, right? You've been teaching for how long? I don't know.
25 years.
25 years. I feel like our job as teachers is to do the research and make as many mistakes as possible, so that with every subsequent year of teaching, we solve. Yeah, you go through that for someone else so that you can actually shorten their learning curve. That's really what I feel like my job is. And as I said, every class is, you know, I teach the courses I wish I had been taught. I think about every single slide. Is this slide useful? Is it not useful? Is it going to be confusing or not confusing? Because I've had the pleasure of having some amazing teachers in my life. And what they were fantastically talented at was taking complicated material and going, here's how to understand it more quickly. Here's how to apply it more efficiently. So I guess that's really what it comes down to. I hate untapped potential. I guess I can say it that way. And, you know, the longer I've taught, the longer I've been around, I've always said, I'm sure there are 100,000 Da Vinci's walking around the world right now who won't ever become Da Vinci because they don't have the right teacher. They don't have someone to show them how to excel. And I don't ever, you know, I feel like as educators, that's really our job, is to help people figure out who they can become and then show them a faster way to become that. So I think that's what really drives me more than anything else.
Love it. You know, for me, like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu has been the way, you know, for like human potential, maybe reach my best, but it needed all these like tactic things as well, you know, like the stretching, the compensations, or the RFAs, you know, the flow, all the different things, you know. And so I'm so appreciative of your work, you know, because it makes it digestible. I'm not gonna read, you know, these encyclopedias of.
It's pretty boring.
You know. So I'm grateful that you're spending years to, you know, make a slide for us. And,
yeah.
Because it's changing my life. It's changing my life. You know, somebody that was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, that had a difficult time. You know, okay, I was a top athlete, right? Got to, you know, top of the food chain, jiu-jitsu, right? Black belt, world champion. Get to fight in the UFC, and then a few years later, having a hard time walking, talking, and I couldn't even put my seatbelt on because everything hurt so bad. So I just, you know, I can't thank you enough, and I can't thank you enough for, you know, for putting this stuff out there, because it's a game changer. You know, it's a game changer for everybody. You know, really, and
I appreciate that.
Gives you another point, right? To be like, okay, you know, a doctor says one thing, but you know, what is Dr. Cobb? What else is there? You know, and it gives alternatives. You know, and you know, I talk about like chiropractor. You know, I have chiropractic students. I have neuroscience, like an ND, you know, and I talk about all the, you know, all these Z health things and TAC-Fit things, you know, and yeah, they're like, oh, wow, yeah, they don't think about it, right? And so you're putting it out there, and so I want to see it grow, you know, I definitely want to see it grow and touch more people, you know, and I know it can help younger people be better at jiu-jitsu, right? It's going to increase their performance, unfair advantage, game changer, and help people be their best, right? For the rest of their whole life, right? Stay healthy their whole life.
Well, that's, it's funny because I think a lot about how I think now versus 15, 20 years ago. As I said, I'll be 50 this year. And obviously, hopefully I'm accumulating a tiny bit of wisdom. I doubt that very often. But at the same time, the idea of lifelong learning, being a lifelong mover, lifelong education, all these things these are critical to me, right? They drive me personally. I think we see so many people that think their athletic life is restricted from, whatever, 12 or 15 to 30, 35, and then you're done. And then from there, you just hit the gym a couple times a week and hold on. And one of the things I think that's come out of all of the study on neuroplasticity and how our brains function is that we have to continue to offer ourselves challenges, right? Brains and humans respond to adversity. We respond to challenge. The problem is we can only respond at the level with which we have competency. So if I spend 20 years ignoring my visual system or having a small balance problem, that reduces my overall ability to meet challenges. So yeah, I love I use the term holistic, and I don't mean holistic in the weird way. I mean in the neuroscience way of everything is connected. So whenever we identify these issues and we work on these issues, I think it expands our movement box, number one, allows us to do far more than we used to do. And then I think it also extends the time that movement box is available to us. And this has always been one of my things, right? Nothing makes us immortal. There's there's no diet that's going to make you immortal. Bad things can happen, but what we all want, I think, is we want to be as good as we can be for as long as we can be. And that's really been kind of my ultimate goal with all of this. The other thing I was going to bring up is, I've really appreciated having you in the courses and your passion for this. And I also always want to emphasize, and this is one of the reasons I love so much working with martial artists and soldiers, is that they are all familiar with work, right? You can have all the information and all the knowledge in the world, but if you don't do the work, it doesn't matter. The problem we often run into is that maybe we don't value it as much. There's a really, he's not super well known, but one of the guys I really look up to in the field of neurorehabilitation, his name's Dr. Klein. And in one of his books, he made this statement, and he said, if someone has a stroke and they go through all the work and rehabilitation to regain use of their arm and leg and learn to walk again, the amount of work that requires is similar to what an athlete would do to earn a gold medal in the Olympics. The problem is you just don't get a gold medal, right? No one else is going to see that work. No one else is going to see the effort that you put into it. So we have to find our own level of enjoyment and our own level of satisfaction with the work and then the ultimate result. And I think that's probably one of the harder things to teach, but it's one of the reasons that I also love what you do. And I love so much, like I said, giving people a foundation in the martial arts, because it teaches them to work. It teaches them to progress and be as good as they can be, right, with their current level of competency. So, all the stuff that you've gone through and the diagnosis and working through all that, most of your students and other people didn't see what you did to improve. So I always tell people, I occasionally get people telling me thank you and, hey, you saved my life. And I'm like, nope, I wasn't there. I gave you some information, but you're the one that really needs to congratulate yourself, because you're the one that did the work for it. So I think that's really important that we just always remind people of.
Yeah. I mean, my mind's all over the place when we're talking about this, just because, man, like how powerful it is, of just having the knowledge, right? And just having the knowledge of what to do, that there is it gives you hope, right? Because of that hope, you're able to make the changes, right?
Yep.
And I talked to my professor at one of the major tournaments like this last year, and I was telling him my story, But what got me through it to be able to do the work was the mindset that developed, that was hardwired in me as a young man.
Yep.
Hardwired, like, I'm gonna do this or die trying, you know. And to do, like, you know, like the tackle, the Z Health, like these things, and I started to see the changes and feel the changes. But I had that mindset so hardwired in me that I was able to, you know, to do the reps, you know, to do it, to study. Like, I mean, man, it's like drinking from a you know, water, like a water, what is it, fire hose or whatever, hose cup with a lot of water coming out of it, you know. And like some of these courses, you know, and it's like, you know, I'm just like, I get thrown against the wall, but you know, I get out of the way and I keep moving forward, you know, and I keep trying to learn, you know, and in the result, I get little pieces, and I'm able to, of course, help myself, but help others, you know. And yeah, you know, it's yeah, I have to go too much into, yeah, but the martial art gave me that mindset. But I appreciate that you're putting that knowledge, the right tools, right, the right things out there for me to you know, heal myself and for me to live my best life. Because it's not just about healing, but it's about living our best life, reaching our human potential.
Yep, absolutely.
Reaching our human potential.
A lot of what we do, or how I've kind of tried to structure our curriculum and everything we teach, you know, like I said, I'm super influenced by all of my teachers in martial arts my whole life.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, everyone that's been in martial arts for 20, 25 years, if you really sit and have a great conversation with them, they emphasize basics, right? You have to lay that foundation. And we're the same way. It's just knowing what those basics are. You know, as a movement doctor, you know, the basics that I was taught in school were, you know, joints need to be mobile, muscles need to be strong, and that's about it. And then the longer you study neurology, you go, oh, there are more basics to movement than I thought. My eyes need to be able to do these things. My inner ear needs to be able to do these things. My breathing needs to be able to do this. I need to have this type of control of my body. So I think a lot of what this, you know, Z Health does is it gives you a better idea of the multiple windows of basic competencies that we need to build. And I think it just means our foundations are broader than we thought, right? It's not just about being this flexible, this strong. There are a lot of other things that go into that. And often when you have problems in one system, it's going to reflect into those other systems. So yeah, I find the two, like I said, conceptually, I find the two very similar. A lot of people come into my curriculum, they love the cool little, you know, this one small little piece over here because it's interesting, and it is. And at some point, it's going to help somebody, right? Help 100%. But the vast majority of what we're doing is just trying to say, look, these are the basic things as humans we need to be able to do.
Yeah, I wanted to spring it up because I've been hanging out with one of my students here. He's a football player.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it's the CTE, you know, it's the, you know, and you know, fighting for a decade. You know, I have a lot of friends like, you know, UFC and they're on disability. Like they go to the store and they can't remember where they're at, you know, and it's not, you know, I'll put out public because it's such a newer sport.
Yep.
But can they get back what they lost?
So the general answer is yes. One of the things that I run into all the time, and I tell people this, years ago, before I had been exposed to so much of neurology and how well human beings can compensate, I used to be pretty diehard, like, okay, if people have this problem, we probably can't help them. If people have this problem, no chance. And every single thing I've ever said that about, I've had someone prove me wrong. So it really comes down to your thinking bias. You know, without getting political, our medical system in the United States is not just a medical system, it's a medical legal system. So there is a lot of danger, like professional danger and financial danger for most medical practitioners to offer too much hope, right?
Right.
Like, hey, yeah, you're going to get better, and they don't get better, and then someone gets, you know, upset and they try to do something legally. That's a huge problem. So since we work on the training side of things, I think it allows me to be more on the hopeful side. to be honest and go, hey, you're gonna have to do a lot of work, and we have a lot of different things that we're gonna have to evaluate and things that we're gonna work on. But I have been amazed consistently every single year of my professional life by watching people recover from things that I would have previously assumed they could not recover from. You know, for people who are really brand new to this idea, I always recommend the book, The Brain That Changes Itself, by Dr. Deutsch. It's easy reading, it's super interesting, and if you want to know what some crazy guys around the world are researching and the changes that they can create, it is a really fantastic entry point into going, okay, yeah, I've had concussive trauma, I'm having memory issues. All right, there are some things that we can do about that. We just have to figure out the right person for you to work with and figure out the right exercises and stimuli. And then you have to be adaptable, right? You really have to be adaptable and change, because as you grow and you change your brain, then it needs different types of work done.
Neuroplasticity.
And that's the key. Yeah, for people that don't know what that is, neuroplasticity basically means that brains can rewire, right? They rewire based off what we do. That seems pretty obvious, but 15 years ago when we talked about plasticity, people went, yeah, that never heard of that, or it doesn't work that way. Because I still have anatomy books that say your brain doesn't change beyond the age of 25. And in fact, that's been proven not just wrong, but completely wrong. We now know that our brains are reshaping all the time. So there are lots of things that we can do, even when areas of the brain have been badly damaged. There are ways to reroute and to relearn things.
I'm an example of that, you know. The right things like Z Health and TACBIT.
Yeah.
This kind of work, right? I can ask you a million other questions, you know, but I know we're kind of coming up on time, you know. So what's in the future for Z Health? What would you like to see happen in the future?
Wow. So when I first started the company, it was very much an experiment, because I felt like, hey, this stuff works really well for me, for the people I work with. I had no idea if it was actually going to be embraced or not. I thought people would think it was too weird. So my first couple of years, it was more experimental to go, all right, do I have something? We've now been in business for almost 20 years, and yeah, it's gone really well. Like, we've grown enormously around the world. I set a goal about 8 years ago to try and get 10,000 fully trained professionals, because I've done a lot of research on social movements and things like that, and I figured that once we hit that point, that's kind of the breaking point for when you start to see cultural changes shifting, where people are going back to school and they're becoming professors and they're starting to change how people think and change the educational system. So we're about halfway to that goal right now. And the reason it's taking a long time is our curriculum is very long. It takes most people 2 to 4 years to work their way through all of our courses and whatnot. So it's just it's a long-term project. So first goal for us is to hit that 10,000 mark, number one. And very much for me, because I've worked and traveled all over the world, I very much want to see the information and the ideas spread into other cultures. So this year and right now, Corona's given us a great opportunity to do a lot of work behind the scenes. This year, we're trying to start our translation programs, where we're going to be trying to get our online certification courses translated into multiple languages, so we can start reaching out to some countries that right now we just don't have the manpower to really go in and work in. So just hopefully, again, creating this overall global spread. We're very lucky because we already have a pretty good representation in elite sport. That helps because, you know, we have teams on countries, probably 40, 50 countries, with trainers who are bringing this into the elite athletic arena. And I'm very, I always tell people, I'm very clear. We don't have all the answers. We know that a lot more research needs to be done. So at some point, we'd love to do more work in that arena as well, helping fund some research. the great part for us right now, I haven't counted recently, but I think as of my last count, we have 12 or 13 of our more advanced students that are in universities working on PhDs, and most of the research is based around some of the concepts that we teach. So, you know, we're just keep trying to plug this, at least this mode of thinking into the research world, and whether or not what we currently say and know and do is the perfect answer, at least we're encouraging different ways of thinking. I always tell people I think growth comes from better questions, not better answers. So the more we can force people and push better questions out around the world, I think we'll see a general improvement in training, in coaching, in therapy. So those are some of my big overall drivers over time.
Well, thank you so much for your time and talking about all these things. I learned a lot today, so I really appreciate that. And I look forward to attending a future Z Health course in person.
In person.
Sorry, I can only do so much online. Blue light, you know, I can only wear so much glasses, red glasses, things like that, you know.
Yes.
So really looking forward to do another course in the future. Thank you for all of your work. Thank you for what you do to help people around the world, you know, directly and indirectly, right? Because of all the people that you train with the systems and the curriculum. So I just want to say thank you. Thank you for everything.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you for having the chat. It's very cool for me and exciting for me to get back, I would say, to my roots. I love working with, talking with, spending time with fighters and martial artists, because as I said, for me, it's, I think it shaped everything I've done my whole life. I always laugh because I didn't even know this whenever I first started in martial arts, but apparently my very first two teachers, one was a cop and one was a neuroscientist. And so I don't know what they did to me when I was 5 or 6, but they basically put me on a course that is
No doubt.
everything I've done really for the rest of my life. So I feel like I owe so much to that community. So yeah, I appreciate you taking the time, and hopefully this is helpful for anyone that checks it out.
100%. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.